I made that decision, and it was one of the hardest I ever had to do. And it was probably my lowest, darkest moments. But when I came out on the other side, I had to rebuild my self-esteem. I had to rebuild using my voice. I had to rebuild everything. And it was also the best thing that ever happened because it gave me the opportunity to see what I was capable of. Like, what happens if you have everything stripped away and you have to reinvent who you are? Who are you?
Hi, everyone. I'm your host, Dr. Shafer of Talks with Dr. Shafer. I'm a physician, mom, life coach, musician, author, publisher, and I'm passionate about helping you reclaim your story so that you can build your most beautiful future. And today on this guest episode on Talks with Dr. Shafer, I am so excited to have a guest who has done just that. And not only is doing it for herself and her family, but also is making sure to bring so many people along with her so that they can also reclaim their stories and their lives. Renee Bauer is an award-winning family law attorney, an international speaker, author of She Who Wins, founder of the Connecticut family law firm, Happy Even After Family Law. Renee is certified as a mediator, guardian ad litem, and collaborative attorney. She is also the host of She Who Wins, a beautiful podcast I highly recommend that you check out after this one, and an advocate for helping women to reclaim their stories. Renee has also launched a new co-parenting app called Parent Copilot that helps parents use AI to rewrite messages to help minimize conflict in communication while co-parenting. And many of us who are on that journey know how incredibly important it is to have that assistance, especially in the early days of figuring out that new relationship and making sure that your kids don't get caught in the crosshairs. So, Renee, we are so excited to have you on the show and to share your wisdom with us.
Thank you so much for having me. I can't wait to dive in.
Oh, me too. So, talking about the podcast right off the top, this is something, again, I highly recommend listeners listen to. You've taken a break from the podcast, but you've been on other people's podcasts, also great resources for listeners to go listen to as well, to follow you on your journey. Something that we said off camera before we got started is I'm so inspired at your journey and how you share your stories because there is such an unapologetic approach to evolution that you embody. And by sharing your stories through your podcast, through your speaking, through your writing, in the way that you do, it really invites people to join you on that journey and to test out maybe living a similar way of life. Now, I'm guessing for most of us, getting to that complete unapologetic state of being was somewhat of a journey. Tell us how you ended up in the place that you are now. And, you talked about before how you have been a writer your entire life, but then you went into law and then family law. How has that journey evolved over time? What inspired you to go after all of these different parts of the puzzle that make up Renee?
So it's funny because who you just described was not who I was 5 years ago. I still am a lawyer, but in my mind, 5 years ago, the perception of what a lawyer's supposed to be is put together and always polished and always professional. And that's how I showed up in my job for a really long time. And that's what you're supposed to do as a lawyer. And I remember even starting out, like when I was a baby lawyer, like how I dressed was like ultra, so conservative. And it was like, that's what you do to be taken seriously. And somewhere along the way, my personal life started to crumble. And I found myself divorced once, and then I found myself divorced twice. And I had so much shame around each of those divorces for different reasons. And I would go into work and I would be put together and I would like click clack down the court hallways. And then I'd get home and like kick off my shoes. And I was such a broken version of myself, because I wasn't talking about what I was feeling. And yes, I could do this. I could walk the walk and talk the talk from a professional perspective, but from a personal perspective, I wasn't really being true to who I was. And a good friend of mine had just started a podcast and she's like, let's have you on. You can be a guest. I'll come over with some sushi And she's like, well, make a martini. And I'm like, okay, I don't know what this podcast thing is about, but you said like some sushi. I haven't seen you in a while. Sure. And then she clipped the mic on to my shirt. And for the first time ever, someone asked me questions about like how I was really doing and asked me questions about the divorce. And I was like a floodgate of what came out of my mouth. I completely forgot who I was supposed to be, that perfectionist. It just all fell away. And I was so truly authentic and vulnerable, which is something I've always struggled with my whole life. But what happened on the other side of that is people started to reach out to me and say, thank you for sharing that story. That's mine. Thank you for putting words to how I felt. And I realized that I'm doing such a disservice to my clients or other women by not actually speaking the things that brought me pause and made me struggle. And that changed everything. And I started to show up in a different way. And I started to show up a little messy and a little imperfect and saying, I don't know if I have it all figured out and I'm going to fail at this. And maybe I hit a wall and maybe I keep going. And that was the evolution of, I don't have to, none of us have to have it all figured out. And we can say, I don't know, I messed up. I'm struggling. Like it's okay to do that. And we can drop that facade of always having to be so perfect or as if like we all always have it together, because most of us don't.
No, we don't. And I think it's really important. There's a quote that I wrote down. I was listening to you on another podcast and it really touched me. And it reminds me of what you're saying now. You said that at the end of the day, we are all here to connect. And when I reflect on that statement and why it really literally gave me pause, I paused the episode and wrote it down and thought about it. And I think when you are a professional woman and you feel that you're in a man's world often, as we are in professions and law, in medicine, as for someone like myself and many of my colleagues, there is a mask that you put on, this veneer. And we think that that's making us look perfect so people will accept us. But I think often it is setting us aside from everyone else, because if you do pretend to be perfect, it's such a disconnecting act. It's not vulnerable. It's not authentic, and no one can meet you there. And you might be trying to avoid triggering your own shame, but by default, when you're pretending to basically be, for lack of a better term, this idea of Barbie, right? This like perfect version of what a professional woman should be, you make yourself untouchable and unreachable. And that's the absolute opposite of connection. When you realized for yourself that you needed to be more authentic to you and really connect with people to kind of break through that wall, what did that mean from a radical accountability standpoint and how you're actually going to change your practice, what you're doing with your habits, with your family, your friends? What did that look like for you?
And I can't say that it was a moment, just a light bulb moment that it was the light bulb moment was this wasn't working anymore and I needed to be true to myself. But I can't say the next day I woke up and there I was in all of my vulnerable glory. It wasn't the way it unfolded. All I did was say, okay, what's the next thing I can do? And that was, let me go on another podcast and tell that story. And every time I told the story, it opened something up in me, and that it was a little less reserved. It was a little bit more honest. And when I started speaking on stages, I think that is really when it cracked myself open, because I'm like, if I'm going to stand up here in front of a couple hundred people and I'm going to tell things that I have never spoken about before, and the first one I ever did, and the first time I really told a really, really hard story, my parents were actually in the audience and they had never heard it. And I looked over and I saw my mother just crying. And if I can do that and I not hold back because I was afraid of being judged, then I knew that I was onto something. And after that particular talk, I looked around and there were people who raised their hands and there were other women who were crying. And it wasn't, I was so worried going up, right? Because sometimes old habits die hard. Like, what if I mess up? Like, what if it doesn't come out correctly? What if I say too many ums? What if I pause too long? Like, all of the things. What if I forget? And no one cared about any of that. It was like even going on stage and not having that perfect motivational talk, which I like to say I give like the anti-motivational talk, but even if it wasn't perfect, it was the other woman's reactions and being able to raise their hand and say, you kind of hit me where it I needed to hear it, or if you can talk about it in that way, then maybe I can have that conversation too. And it was, one small step in front of the other, and you start to flex that muscle and it becomes a little bit easier. And then when I was writing my book, you asked the earlier question about writing. I've always been a writer. It's a thing that I've done since I was a child, and I wanted to traditionally publish a book. And there's a process to that. If anyone knows, you have to get a literary agent, then they pitch it to publishers, and the that process was grueling in and of itself. The number of rejections that I received just from agents before I finally got that one yes. But when I finally got the yes, and it took another 3 years to get a book deal, but the part that is so, and I like to say, like, the path that you're on has its own timing. Even if you're like me, I'm like, I want it when I want it, and I wanted it yesterday. But that book was not ready to be written, because when we got the book deal, I actually wrote a different book than what the book proposal was. And when I sat down to write, I called up my agent and I'm like, I have a I have a different idea. Like, can I scrap those chapters and start over? She's like, just write it. And that book is so much more honest than that first one from 3 years ago, because I had been on that journey for 3 years, talking and sharing and saying things and being unapologetic in the sense of, like, this is just my truth. And it's not my business how you hear it and whether you agree or accept it. It's not my business. And that's something that I now share with clients. It's not your business how your ex responds to you, if you're acting in integrity and doing it in the way that you think is true and civil, and all of that. That's not like free reign to do and say whatever. But um, so that whole path was such a journey of slowly unfolding in order to be the version that's here right now, which I'm sure there's so much more that has to unfold and will continue to evolve, which is, I think, what we're intended to do. We're not supposed to stay the same from now until the day we die.
I love that. And I think if there's anything that I would hope would be a nugget that our listeners could take from you today, would be this commitment to leaning into that unapologetic evolution. And I think there is so much power. And when you understand that other people's desires of you, wants for you, opinions of you, it is truly not your business.
Yeah.
And when we live in that mode of paying too much attention to that, we basically don't tend our own gardens and we don't grow, because we're busy just kind of like lopping off the bits of us that everyone's pointing at and saying, like, oh, you got to get rid of that. But then we don't have time to grow, and we don't nourish our soil. We don't make sure that we're facing the sun, right? We just are so hyper focused on trying to be someone that we're not. And so I love, like listening to your podcast, very successful podcast, very wonderful podcast. But you took a pause and you said, you know what? Right now in my life, this format's not working, and I'm taking a pause, and this is what I'm doing. I think there is so much power in that. And for so many of us who are maybe not quite at that mindset yet, we haven't arrived there in our lives. It's so inspiring to see someone else being so unapologetically committed to evolution, because it can just plant those seeds of, I'm allowed to do that. Because for many of us, we've never actually seen that. And that makes me think about that keynote speech. I think you don't necessarily love to talk about the nitty gritty of that speech always when you're outside of that speaker hall, but it was a very inspiring speech that you gave about a pivotal moment in your interpersonal relationship that made you realize that you needed to change, right? This person wasn't going to change. They said something, I've got to fly around me. Sorry. It's like keeps coming to my face.
So it's
You
my
recognize,
ex not wanting you to bring this up.
I guess, right? Oh, I relate more than you know. This moment where you recognize that, this person wasn't going to change for your life to look differently. You had to change because you had to set that boundary of what am I willing to accept in my relationships. I know you don't like to share all the details and we all just need to get tickets to your events. And I totally respect and get that, but can you share a little bit more about that experience? Because again, I want to share, having listened to you talk about it before, a personal reflection that I had coming from a different time in my life, because I think it's really why we share these stories, because we can really inspire other people on their journeys.
Yeah. So I got divorced the first time when my son was 2, and it was the right thing to do. And my ex is a wonderful father, and we have a great co-parenting relationship. But we weren't the right relationship together. Like, we met young, and so onward we went. But then I met somebody who I thought was the person who was the right one for me, and I got married really quickly into that second marriage. And I also knew very, very quickly that something was wrong with this relationship. And I would tell myself it's just growing pains. We're still getting to know each other because we got married in the first 7 or 8 months. And then he would say things, that would make me question my own worth. Like, he would say something. I had come home from the gym one day, and he said, I don't know why you bother working out, because your ass will always be big. And so those are the things that like slowly chip away at your self-esteem. So here I was, a business owner, a lawyer, having employees, and yet I was like, my self-esteem was in the dirt, and I was starting to feel like, okay, maybe all these things are true. And I knew that the person I was becoming in that marriage was not the person who I was proud of. I am usually very cool, calm, and collected. I am not a yeller. And I became this person who I didn't recognize. And there was a moment where we were screaming at each other, and I picked up a fork on my kitchen table, and it was like a super heavy, chunky fork. And I threw it down on the ground and it left this hole. And I knew in that moment that if I don't make a decision, I'm not going to look in the mirror and know who I am, because this person has changed every single day of my life. I wake up and I start to change my own behavior to eliminate the reactions of this person. It's easier to not go out and see my friends. It's easier to not show up at the work events because I don't want to deal with the wrath on the other side. And the crazy part is, even when I had that realization, I still stayed for like another 6 months after that. And it got to, we celebrated a 1 year anniversary, and we were in Paris, and it was an awful trip. And I came home and I'm like, you know what? Like, I have to decide, do I want my child to grow up in this setting? And even though I had the shame, even though I knew people were going to say, I told you so, even though I had all the family and friends that I thought were going to say, what's wrong with you? This is a you problem. And I thought that about myself, like, what is wrong with me? Maybe I'm the one, maybe I'm the problem. And I made that decision, and it was one of the hardest I ever had to do. And it was probably my lowest, darkest moments. But when I came out on the other side, I had to rebuild my self-esteem. I had to rebuild using my voice. I had to rebuild everything. And it was also the best thing that ever happened, because it gave me the opportunity to see what I was capable of. And it was like, what happens if you have everything stripped away and you have to reinvent who you are? Who are you? Who do you show up as? What do you do when the lawn needs to be cut? What happens when you have a house to take? Like, it's just like the simplest things, right? Like, the simplest things is, if someone was taking care of that, what happens when you have to do it? And you just get stronger and stronger and stronger. And part of that journey is there's nothing that can beat me down now. Like, I know I've gone through that. And then when other challenges come up, and they have, I'm like, I've got this. Like, that was, this is nothing. Like, I can face any level of adversity because I know that I know how to do it. I know how to, like, stand up tall and say, okay, now what? What's the next step? And that's the power. And I have clients all the time who are getting divorced who have that same fear of being alone or living by themselves. And it's a just give yourself the time and the grace to go through it, to feel it, to have the lows, to have the highs, to celebrate it, to cry, to do all the things. Because when you come out on the other side, you can hold your head up high and say, you know what, I survived that. And you should be proud of it.
Absolutely. I think, and it's so important as you're growing through this challenge that you collect what I think from a scientific standpoint, these data points, like you said, like every little thing that you do that maybe your ex-spouse, your ex-partner used to do. Give yourself credit for that, even if it's something as simple as, let's say you never gassed up your car before, which, some people may see that as, oh, what a loving spouse you had. They wouldn't even let you gas up your car. But then people who have been victims of domestic violence and abuse understand that if you infantilize someone to the point that they feel they're incapable, that just keeps them prisoner, right? If you say, oh, don't worry about retirement. I'll handle that. You're not good with money. Don't worry about that. Let's have our paychecks go this place. And you know what? Don't worry about working. Your time is too precious for that. Stay home with the kids. All these little things that can seem very loving over time can actually lead us to believe that we are not capable of being independent people. And so when we're looking over the precipice of the future that seems so unclear and what am I going to do, just taking those little steps and saying, okay, I was afraid of filling up my car. I was afraid of and so many car analogies, but I was afraid of putting windshield wiper fluid in my car because I've never done it before. And then you do it and you're like, holy smokes, did he say that I should keep him around because I needed him to do that for
Hey,
me?
hey.
Yeah, he did. And then you look at it and you realize, wow, all those little things tell you how capable you are. And they may seem very silly and small, but take every little win that you can and build yourself back up so that you get to the point that you reflected on where you realize there's nothing that I can't do after going through a divorce. Because even if you initiate the divorce, it's still something really challenging to go
Right.
through.
And when someone says they're afraid of something, I say, so, okay, you can be afraid and you can still do it. Like, you can be afraid and still take that first step forward. I mean, speaking for me is, I have this profound fear of speaking on stage, despite litigating, and I can be in a courtroom and it's a totally different setting than standing on stage. And every time I do it, I feel like I want to pass out 10 minutes before. But then it's like, so what? So what? I'm afraid, and I'm still going to do it because it's important and it matters. And it's so you take that, you recognize that, like, fear shouldn't be holding you back. You use it to propel yourself forward. You just kind of acknowledge it. You're like, yeah, I'm afraid. Okay, now, and you keep doing it anyway. And then that thing you're afraid of becomes something you're a little less afraid of. And then it doesn't mean you're never going to have fear again. We're humans. Of course we do. Of course we have anxiety. Of course we're afraid of uncertainty. Like, those are all natural reactions, but not doing something because of that, of being afraid or overwhelmed or uncertain, I think is really sad. And I always say, like, at the end of my life, I want to look back and be like, listen, I went for everything that I thought I wanted to do. Maybe some of it worked out, maybe some of it didn't, but I went for it. I don't have any regrets. I want to know that I at least tried. I don't want to ever look back and be like, if only I had taken the time to do that. If only I started the business. If only I wrote the book. Like, time is so precious. We don't know what tomorrow looks like, or next year, or 5 years from now. Like, do it. And then, so that when you get to that point, you can say, I went for it. And who knows, you might be wildly successful at whatever it is that you had no idea that was on the horizon, by just putting your foot in front of the other and saying, I'm going to do it anyway, regardless of what that destination looks like.
I love it. And it makes me think of, this opportunity to, when we invest in ourselves and our mindset and really think about, am I discerning the difference between fear or excitement? Because I think a lot of times early in life, we have those two completely switched. And we actually feel some fear with, often if it's a woman, a male counterpart, and that fear is interpreted as butterflies. It's misinterpreted as excitement, right? And so we have a lot of people get into coercive controlling relationships because they interpret fear as excitement. And then in our lives, though, as we get older and we're no longer, stuck in situations and circumstances that we can't control like we were when we were kids, and we were learning all these coping mechanisms that we bring into adulthood, we have the same tools, but we don't have the same environment. And we are often misinterpreting excitement, right? Like, I really want to do that thing, as fear. And it's not, right? We don't need to be afraid of that thing. It won't hurt us. And in fact, if we don't try the things that excite us and inspire us, that will hurt us in the end. So I so appreciate how you, again, it's that unapologetic approach that I think is so important, because once you let go of that shame, that's when you really propel forward and you allow those fears or that excitement, that curiosity about things to inspire you rather than make you feel stuck that, oh, I wish I was doing that thing, but I'm not. Okay, I'm not doing that thing, but I wish I was, right? Can I change the momentum of how I'm moving forward? And what I wanted to reflect on when you share that story about being on that vacation in Europe with your then spouse and feeling all this shame, this is the second marriage and it's not going well, and what will people think? All of those things are going through your head. And you have that experience, that moment where he really crossed the line verbally. And it just took a second, right? He just said a word that was completely out of place, inappropriate, and you understood.
You dug deep for that.
But this is investigative reporting disguised as a healthcare podcast. So you had this moment. And the thing is, we are so trained to ignore those little moments where our nervous system tells us, ooh, oh, that didn't feel okay. We're often so trained to ignore that, and you didn't. And that is why, from my perspective, that story resonates so much with audiences that are, maybe they're experiencing those moments in their lives, but they're dulling down their response. They're ignoring that fear and they are making excuses for that partner. For me, I was on that same vacation. I was in Europe. And it's a really unique experience because, you're in a place, you don't necessarily speak the language, you're not at your home, you don't have your support system, you don't have your family, right? So when you're on vacation in a foreign country, it can be, stressful and unique. And I was on a similar vacation with my then partner, who became upset. I don't even recall why. I think I really dissociated in this moment because it was so incredibly shocking. I was quite young. This was 15 years ago now. So I was very young. And we're in a foreign country on a street I don't know. Suddenly I'm being screamed at. And I remember just looking in a window pane and seeing people sitting inside a restaurant, women with their mouths open, gaping at us on the street as my then partner just screamed at me. And I just kind of stood there. I didn't know what was happening. I didn't know why it was happening. And then they just left. And they were gone. And this was 15 years ago. So, we had smartphones, but it wasn't like now where you've got your GPS and you're like, where are you? And you're texting. No, I didn't know where this person was. I don't even think the cell phones worked in that country at the time. I didn't know if they were coming back. I'm in this foreign country and I was actually about to go further east to where that person was from. And here I am. I don't know if they're coming back. I don't know what's going on. And I remember just walking through the streets of that foreign city, tears streaming down my face, people staring at me because everyone else is on vacation having the time of their life. And I'm just walking through the streets in total shock and not knowing what the next step was. But I was in a stage of my life and in a mindset where I didn't understand that the next step was mine.
Yeah.
And I was still leaning into trying to get that person, trying to win back their affection, trying to win back the approval that I had somehow lost. That was my mindset. And so instead of in that moment seeing how incredibly frightening and inappropriate and just abusive and not okay that was, I took that caretaking role. And in a few days, I got on a train and went further east with this person to a place where they had people to support them. They spoke the language. I had nothing. I was completely dependent on them to even register me with the government. This is, a farther eastern country where, you have to register with the government. You have to stay at a certain place. At the time, it was very poor and continues to be very poor relationship with the US. So it was quite a dangerous place for me to go to. So after this encounter, I didn't leave. I got on that train.
Yeah.
And I went deeper and deeper into this territory where I was less and less safe, all because I was trying to somehow win back that approval and keep something that wasn't meant to be kept. And so when I heard your story personally, it took me back. This is something I don't think about very often, and I'm no longer in that relationship, for which I'm thankful. It took me back to that moment, and I just thought to myself, this is why we have to share these messy stories. Because if then me had heard someone say that story, maybe I would have thought, oh, that feels similar, and that wasn't okay. And she felt empowered to choose herself. Maybe I can start to do the work that I need to do to work towards a place where I will choose safety, where I won't not only, not react to something that was not safe and not okay, but then put myself in less safety moving forward. It's really quite incredible when I reflect back. And so I think that's so important. And I think also, as an attorney who works in family law, it is so important that you have personally mastered this, and some of these difficult experiences you've had, no one would wish them upon you. I imagine, however, that it really informs how you have worked with clients and how you support people and women who are leaving abusive marriages that maybe aren't to this point yet where they're willing to say this was wrong, but maybe they'll give you the data, they'll give you the facts of the case, hoping that you'll be the first person to say, do you think that that was okay? Because I don't think you deserve that. And that doesn't sound safe to me.
I always say to clients when they're in that position, and some are in abusive relationships and some aren't, but I will say to them, is this the relationship you want your own child to have? And usually that question allows them to answer it honestly, because if you ask them, is this the relationship you want to stay in? They don't know how to answer it. But if you ask them, is this the relationship would you want your child to experience? Their answer is always no. And so then if it's not okay for them, why is it okay for you? And it's being so to your story, which is very similar. And so for any of your listeners, just to tie it up when you're thinking, well, what is she talking about? I didn't hear a story about being in Europe. So I was in Notre Dame, and I was with my ex. And if you're wherever there, it's really quiet. And I had asked him for some money so I could light a candle because he was holding the money control thing. And he called me something that I won't use for this show, so you don't have to put the rating on it. And it's a word that is typically not part of my vocabulary. And so it was a very similar experience that even after that moment, I did stay a little bit longer too. But when I finally got out of that and felt all of the things and felt the shame and felt broken, I also knew that there was another side, and having reach that other point where things are really good and lifting yourself up and removing yourself from that situation, I can then look at a client and say, you know what? I know this feels impossible right now, but I promise you on the other side, you're going to be okay. How do you know that? Well, let me share my experience. Let me talk about what I went through. Let me talk about how it impacted me and the work it took to come out on the other side of that. And so many stories are like that. I had a client who I adored, and she was in this marriage that was not healthy and it was not good, and she would have stayed forever. It wasn't abusive, but it definitely was not respectful, and certainly not something that was bringing her any sort of happiness. And she was so afraid of having to deal with everything on her own, having to be financially independent and find a job and live on her own. And even she liked traveling. What does travel look like if it's on her own? And to the very last day, she would have stayed married to him had he decided to withdraw the divorce. But a year after she gets divorced, she reaches out to me and says, I never realized how unhappy I had been in my marriage until I was forced to recreate my life on the other side. And now I'm so happy and I'm dating and it's healthy. And it was like sometimes we're just forced into situations and we don't want the marriage to fall apart or the relationship not to work, but we're forced into dealing with it. And it's the best thing that ever happens. And so I always say to people, like, why sit and let life happen to you? Like, you have the opportunity to make that decision. You had the opportunity to not get on the train to go east, right? I had the same opportunity to accelerate the decision that I ultimately made, but it didn't happen right away either. But we don't have to sit there and wait for something else outside of our control to force us into that next stage. We get to be proactive about it. And I think that that's the lesson is I wasn't proactive until I hit that rock bottom. And then I had no choice. The way I saw it is I had to, or I would not be sitting here today doing this. And so there's a choice that we all have, and we get to make that decision, and we get to decide that it's not okay to stay in something toxic, abusive. It doesn't have to be physically abusive. It could be emotionally. You know when it's not good, right? Like, you know when it's not healthy, and that's okay. Like, that's enough. Sometimes just having a relationship that's just fine is enough to make a choice to do something different. We have the power and the control to make those life-changing decisions and to say, I'm not happy and I want something different, and not have to justify it or explain yourself.
Exactly. No justification. Learning to trust your nervous system and really lean into how you feel about a situation is really key to even start that process of asking what you want. Because if you're so busy making excuses for someone's behavior,
Mhm.
that's not even about you, right? Is this serving you? Is it bringing you, as you mentioned about your client, is this bringing you happiness? Because I think, and that's a part of why some people may ask, why do you have family law attorneys on Talks with Dr. Shafer? What does it have to do with health? I really feel very strongly that it has a lot to do with our
Yeah.
health. It is so important that we have respectful relationships that build us up, that don't make us compartmentalize or lose parts of ourselves or relinquish ourselves to not growing for fear of losing this connection. That's not a true connection. That's entrapment.
Yeah.
We need to be able to go where we can grow, because not only are our bodies growing, our noses are growing. You know, we know that these things are happening. We're getting shorter, but other parts of us are growing, right? That's a part of our life's journey. Not only is that happening, we're mentally growing. None of us is staying the same. So if you are in a relationship that doesn't allow you to authentically grow, it's not even really a relationship. It feels like more of a life sentence. And that's
Yeah.
not a healthy recipe for your life. Now, moving kind of forward through, you've decided, let's say for a client, they've decided to divorce because they don't have a healthy relationship, but let's say they have children. And now they're trying to navigate this space between, it's a fresh divorce, let's say, and they're trying to get to the place where they can peacefully co-parent, but maybe there's a lot of emotions, a lot of things that need to happen in the interim. They're trying to communicate peacefully with their ex-partner. They're trying to stay out of court. They're trying to not ruffle any feathers or unnecessarily cause issues. They just want to co-parent. How does your new app tell us how that helps people learn how to do that using AI so that they can learn this new way of communicating even after maybe a really tricky divorce?
So a few months ago, I had a client reach out to me and ask me to help them craft a reply to an email that their spouse had sent them. The email was a little angry. And for a few days, we went back and forth where he would prepare a reply and then I would massage it so it wasn't so inflammatory. And I thought to myself, there has to be a better way. There has to be, you're paying me a lot of money to be your writer, your copy editor, so to speak, for communication. And that's where I had the idea for an app to help parents facilitate communication, de-escalate, help them check their tone, help them remove the emotion from it. And so from that circumstance, Parent Copilot was born, and we launched the app a couple weeks ago. So parents can upload their parenting plan, and it will extract key information to help and really become a parent coach, which people pay a lot of money for parent coaches right now, which are a live person who aren't always available at your fingertips. And this gives them a tool in order to help that back and forth. Because at the end of the day, after the divorce, you still have parents that need to figure this out and they need to communicate. And you can't always have a professional on speed dial, nor do you want to for the rest of your life. And so Parent Copilot would be a tool that someone can go and help facilitate that communication so that the communication is brief, that it's child focused, that is removing the emotion from it. So that's available anywhere where apps are downloaded.
That's wonderful. I really appreciate you doing that and putting that into the world. And I also appreciate you mentioning, I think, is it
If,
BIF?
yeah.
Brief?
Yep.
Brief?
And
What's this? Informative and friendly?
friendly and brief, informative, friendly. And there was one more. It might be fair. There's another F too. Yeah.
That sounds
Yeah.
fair.
Yeah. Right.
That sounds fair. The way that you want to try to aim
Right.
towards communicating, because again, kind of reeling it back to the situation that often leads to dissolution of relationships. Sometimes it's just that it's not working out. Sometimes it's that there is some coercive control issues.
Right.
There's a real imbalance there, and control being exerted. And often you have one partner that's maybe more controlling and another partner who's constantly trying to over-explain their position as a coping mechanism, as a trauma response to that experience. And I think apps like what you created are really helpful to help keep you brief, informative, friendly, fair. If you can't, you've got the acronym BIF. You could say, oh, can't you just use the acronym? Well, sometimes, especially if these are really hard-grained habits that you have, ingrained habits to over-explain, over-inform, maybe ask for permission for things that they're in the parenting plan. You don't have to ask for permission. You're opening yourself up to problems, right? So just a way to help someone navigate a different way of communicating so that hopefully down the line, they're not having to use their attorney as often. They're not needing to use the app as often, but from a starting off place, it can be really helpful to retrain the way you respond to someone.
Right. And then you can take, if they send you a text that triggers you, you can copy that and put it in there and ask your parent coach to reply. And it will give you some parenting tips on how to deal with that, as well as a reply that you can then take that and put that back. And so it's less fueled by you like furiously, typing away with your fingers and all the emotion that comes out of your fingertips, so that you can kind of bring it down a notch and parent and communicate in a way that really tries to be child-centered and less emotion-driven.
Yeah, I think sometimes in those exchanges, we get stuck in the emotion.
Yeah.
And I call it being pulled into a tornado. It's like you get met with this
Yeah.
energy. So then you respond in kind, and now you're dancing, and it takes two to tango, as we know. It takes a lot of restraint to withdraw from just
Yeah.
getting into that dance immediately and say, no, I'm going to stay really centered in my weather. And I think it also, when you start practicing that, and the app can help so much with that, it gives you so much of your power and your peace back when you, and maybe also some empathy too for this other person. When you
Yeah.
don't get emotionally involved, you might be able to step back and just think, okay, this person doesn't have great coping
Yeah.
mechanisms. They're upset about something. They needed to respond this way. They needed, for whatever reason, to have this tone. I
Yeah.
don't. And I don't have to respond in kind. And I think getting to that place in communication can be so healing. But if you're not there yet,
Yeah.
that's okay. That's why people, professionals, experts like yourself make this app, because you know
Yeah.
it's necessary, because many people are kind of at that early phase of being kind of so reflexively trained
Yeah.
to respond in that way.
Yeah. I always tell clients you don't have to show up to every fight you're invited to. You get to sit it out and not
Yeah.
participate.
Yeah. And one that I found really helpful. I'm curious to hear your thoughts on this. When faced with such invitations that sometimes they're baiting, right? They're trying to get a certain response from you. Taylor Swift has a song called
Mhm.
Dear Reader. Do you know this one?
Yeah.
And she says, Dear Reader, if it feels like a trap, you're already in one.
Yeah.
And that quote for me has really informed my life. And I taught it to my kids too, that, like, again, it's your nervous system.
Yeah.
If your nervous system's like, ooh, oh, this doesn't feel good, lashing out at that point's not going to get you what you want. It's just knowing, oh, this feels like a trap because it is a trap.
Yeah.
And I'm going to step out of it.
I mean,
And again, the app can help.
yeah, I mean that's a good like life lesson, right? Like you're dealing with
Yeah.
a boss, a coworker, family, like no matter what it is, if you get that like emotional response, it's probably time to pause and maybe put it down and go back to it tomorrow when you can kind of breathe through it and not be so reactionary.
Yes, exactly. That pause too. Is that a part of the app? Is there, maybe some people need to also put a timer in where it's like, the app will not let me
Right.
respond for X amount of time, like for 2 hours, 3 hours, 12 hours. Like,
That's a good
this is
idea.
not,
That's version 2.
there you go. We're just spitballing over
Yeah.
here. I love it. Oh, it's so interesting. And I love, there's so many challenges that come up with technology, and
Yeah.
when we're parenting and we're just out living our lives in the world, technology poses many new challenges, things that drain our energy and our attention, et cetera. But then there's really cool things you can
Yeah.
do, like this app. And in general, that's something that I so respect and admire about you, is I just see you as someone who's like, you're kind of always scanning the environment. Like, what am I going to do? I've got this, and I can't control what ingredients come to
Yeah.
me, but I can control what I cook with it. And you're always cooking. You're always like finding out, what can I take from what's given me and make something really helpful or beautiful or interesting? So you just had this come out weeks ago. So I know you're really busy, but I also know you have other things up your sleeve too. What is coming next for you? What are the things that are inspiring you?
So it's so funny because I had probably 2 weeks ago, I had this moment where I had actually nothing happening. Like everything was so quiet. And I was like, I'm really uncomfortable. And I'm like, but I'm going to sit in this. I'm going to allow myself just to be at rest and just take time for like adding extra walks in, extra visits to the gym. Like I'm going to just rest and wait. And it didn't take long for the waiting to be like, oh, the next thing popped up. And so, and then, so I started putting together ideas for the next book. So I started mapping out and outlining, but I was also not going to be quick to just start writing. I really wanted to, like, I have a few different ideas and I just put them down and put notes, and I was just going to let them sit there and decide which one was really calling me. And then the other idea that's kind of like, I'm like a mad scientist trying to figure out if I want to do it, is I love live events. But I stepped back from doing those as well, because I felt like, all right, I felt like there was live event fatigue. All of a sudden you started to see live events everywhere, and I'm like, and I wasn't feeling it after I had two of them. But as I really re-engaged back into brick and mortar business in the law firm and started really scaling that and focusing on that, I did notice there was a need for female lawyers to connect. And because so often the challenges as being a woman in that professional space, like how we started talking about, there's lots of lawyer conferences, but they're exactly what they sound like. But there's not a really good like conferences for female women to come, for women to come together and just connect and spend time and talk and share their struggles and share. And it's not just like jamming a continuing legal ed credit down your throat. So that's the thing that I'm starting to think about for next year. But I'm kind of in a little bit of a season of pause, just to decide like, where do I want to put my energy? And it took me a little bit to be okay with not having that next thing teed up. But that's the space I'm living in right now.
I love that. And I love that you have invited us to consider that a season of pause can be the next step.
Yeah.
That can be the season. That can be the thing you're doing. Because when you think about it, when we're just going, 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 and we're kind of in a state of burnout and just overextension, it requires the exertion of a counterforce to pause.
Yeah.
So the pause is intentional and it's meaningful. So I love it. And I wonder if we can ask our listeners and ask ourselves, you're already asking yourself, and this is something I really struggle with too. I think it's probably a shared experience of many professional women in different professions. This really struggle with leaning into the pause and feeling like, who am I if, right? We talk about with divorce, who am I if I'm not married? Who am I if I'm not a lawyer? Who am I if I'm not productive?
Right.
Who am I if I pause?
Yeah.
And that's an important question to examine, because you are exactly who you were supposed to be. Mm-hmm. You are not your productivity, but your productivity really, in my opinion, and I think it's really borne out from you and the way that you have moved in the world, your productivity really soars when you allow yourself to be authentic and lean into where your energy is naturally flowing, rather than trying to keep going upstream, right? Like, no, this is what I'm supposed to be doing right now. So I love that. I love you inviting us to pause and to really think about what our next step should be, whether if it's a change in our relational status or if it's just simply, I just need to prioritize myself. I need to take the walk, like you said, or I need to think about my health. I need to get better sleep. Whatever it is today that will help refocus your energy and make you decisions moving forward is such a beautiful investment in you. I so appreciate you being here and sharing everything with us today. I could chat with you forever, but I know, you've got an hourly fee as an attorney, so I have to be really, really careful.
This one's on the house.
Oh, nice. Oh, thank you. Oh, well, me and the storytellers, we really appreciate that. Renee, how can people connect with you? I know, again, you haven't done recent episodes of the podcast, but I want everyone to go and listen to it, because that's the cool thing about these podcasts. They're evergreen. So go listen to the podcast, connect with you, get your books. Where's the best place for people to do that?
So Instagram is always a great place. So you can find me there at Ms. Renee Bauer. And I think we are connected now. And then my website is familylawyerct.com, which has a lot of resources, even though I have a firm in Connecticut, but we do have some free guides online for anyone who's going through a divorce or wanting to get organized. So I welcome you to go and grab that as well.
That's amazing. And I definitely encourage people to do that, because I think, especially when you talk to people who work in family law and they have all of these extra resources, sometimes you feel so overwhelmed and you don't want to do them because you're like, oh no, I already have to do X, Y, Z. But this is a gift. This is something that you put together because you say, no. Yeah. You need to do this. Take this time. And this one's on the house, by the way. A lot of stuff won't be.
Right. Right.
But use those resources. Listen to podcasts that help support you on your journey of choosing yourself. Make sure you're getting good self-care. When we go through life-changing situations like divorce, separation, it's really challenging. And a reason why we have these discussions on Talks with Dr. Shafer is I really hope people feel seen and heard and understood that we know that this is a really difficult time in your life. Take the pause, take the time that you need, invest in yourself. You will get through this and you will be stronger than you ever thought you could be at the other side.
Thank you for having me. This was wonderful.
Thank you, Renee, so much for being here. And thank you to our storytellers. If you haven't already, make sure you subscribe to the show so you don't miss other inspiring episodes we have coming. And also check out Renee's book, her website, and the podcast. Until next time, stay safe and take care. I'll talk to you soon.
Hold on to me and I will try to make it right. Everyone needs something. Let me be that